What if the biggest threat to your financial future isn't the large crisis you fear, but the small, invisible drains you never even notice? Not the job loss, not the medical emergency, not the market crash. The thing quietly dismantling your wealth right now costs less than a cup of coffee, and that is precisely why it's so dangerous. There's a concept in warfare called death by 1,000 cuts. No single wound is fatal. Each one in isolation seems manageable, but the accumulation, slow, relentless, invisible, is what kills. Your finances are dying exactly this way, and the weapon isn't some dramatic financial catastrophe. It's the $6.50 coffee, the $14.99 subscription you forgot you had, the lunch you didn't plan for, the convenience fee, the just this once. These are not minor inconveniences. These are the instruments of the slow bleed, and they are working against you every single day with mathematical precision. Let me tell you about someone. Her name doesn't matter. She earns a solid income, lives in a reasonable apartment, and by every visible metric appears to be a financially functioning adult. She doesn't gamble. She doesn't make reckless investments. She doesn't buy luxury items she can't afford. But every month, without fail, she arrives at the same place, behind, not dramatically behind, just slightly behind, a few $100s short of what she expected to have, and she can never quite explain where it went. She reviews her bank statement and sees dozens of small transactions, none of them scandalous, none of them obviously wrong, and yet the sum of them has consumed something she cannot recover. She is experiencing the slow bleed, and she has been experiencing it for years without a name for it, without understanding it, and therefore without any power to stop it. The slow bleed is not about spending money. Spending money is unavoidable and, within reason, entirely appropriate. The slow bleed is about spending money unconsciously, in small enough increments that the decision never rises to the level of awareness where it could be evaluated, questioned, or reconsidered. It is the financial equivalent of a leak inside a wall. You can't see it. You can't hear it, but it is steadily destroying the structure from the inside. Charlie Munger spent decades studying the ways human cognition fails us in high-stakes decisions. One of his most important insights was about what he called psychological denial, the tendency to avoid confronting information that creates discomfort. When it comes to small spending, denial is the default. We don't add up the subscriptions. We don't track the daily purchases. We don't calculate the annual cost of the habits we consider too small to matter, because if we did, if we truly sat with that number, we would be forced to confront something uncomfortable, that we are not victims of financial misfortune. We are architects of financial self-sabotage, and that truth is much harder to carry than blaming the economy. So let's carry it together. Let's do what most people refuse to do and actually look at the math. The average person has between 7 and 12 active subscription services at any given time. Many of these were signed up for intentionally. Several were forgotten. A few were free trials that converted to paid without a conscious decision being made. Take a conservative average of 9 subscriptions at an average of $12 per month. That's $108 per month, $1,296 per year, on services many of which are providing essentially zero value to your life. But subscriptions are only one branch of the slow bleed. They are visible if you look. The deeper drain is behavioral. Consider convenience spending. The coffee that costs 3 times what it would at home because the shop is on your route. The lunch bought because you didn't prepare one the night before. The delivery fee and tip on food that would have cost 1/3 of the price if you'd driven to get it. The parking, the ATM fee, the while I'm here purchase that happens every single time you enter a store without a specific list. None of these are financial emergencies. Each one feels entirely reasonable in the moment, but they share a defining characteristic that makes them categorically different from intentional spending. They are not decisions, they are defaults, and defaults, by definition, are never examined. They simply happen. Robert Kiyosaki, for all his controversies, identified something in Rich Dad, Poor Dad that remains psychologically accurate regardless of how you feel about the rest of his framework. Most people spend their entire lives working for money instead of understanding how money works. The slow bleed is the mechanism of that trap. When you spend unconsciously on small things, you're not simply losing money. You're losing something more valuable, the compounding power of capital that never had the chance to exist. And that loss is invisible precisely because you never see what the money could have become. You only see what it was: a coffee, a subscription, a convenience. Never the investment it might have funded, never the asset it could have purchased, never the freedom it could have represented. This is where the mathematics becomes almost cruel in its clarity. Let's say the slow bleed is costing you $300 per month. For many people, the real number is significantly higher, but let's be conservative. $300 per month, redirected into an index fund averaging a 7% annual return over 30 years, becomes over $360,000, not from income growth, not from financial genius, simply from stopping the bleed and deploying what was already there. That $300 was never small. It was always a fortune. The slow bleed just made it invisible before it could become one. Naval Ravikant talks about wealth creation in terms of leverage, the ability to multiply the impact of your time, money, and decisions. But leverage can only work if you have capital to deploy. The slow bleed systematically destroys capital before it can ever reach the point of leverage. Every unconscious transaction is not just an expense, it is a removal of potential leverage from your financial future. And the people who build wealth are not, in most cases, dramatically higher earners than those who don't. They are people who understood this dynamic early enough to stop it. Now here is the concept I want you to sit with. The slow bleed is not a spending problem. It is an attention problem. Every financial drain that operates below the threshold of conscious attention will continue indefinitely, not because you approve of it, but because you have never actually decided about it. The decision was never made. The default was accepted. And defaults are permanent until they are interrupted by a conscious choice. This is why budgets alone don't fix the slow bleed. A budget is a plan for the money you're aware of. The slow bleed lives in the money you're not aware of. You cannot plan around what you cannot see. So, how do you see it? The first layer of interrupting the slow bleed is what I call the full audit of defaults. Not a budget review, not a glance at last month's statement. A complete, unflinching, categorical accounting of every recurring charge, every habitual spend, and every default behavior that touches your money, conducted with the same analytical rigor you would apply to any serious business decision. Because that is what this is. Your personal finances are a business, and no serious business operator allows expenses to accumulate invisibly without review. The CEO who cannot account for where the company's money is going is not running a company. They are running a slow disaster. Most people are running exactly that with their personal finances and calling it normal because everyone around them is doing the same thing. The second layer is the 24-hour principle. Every non-essential, unplanned purchase that exceeds a threshold you define, say $25, requires a mandatory 24-hour waiting period before it can be made. This is not about deprivation. It is about converting defaults into decisions. Most impulse spending does not survive 24 hours of reflection, not because you decide against it logically, but because the emotional impulse that created the desire in the first place has already dissipated. The purchase that felt urgent at 2 p.m. on a Tuesday often feels unnecessary by Wednesday morning. The 24-hour principle doesn't restrict your spending. It simply ensures that your spending is the result of actual decisions rather than momentary reactions. The third layer is understanding what behavioral economists call the pain of paying. Research by Drazen Prelec and Duncan Semester demonstrated that paying with cash is psychologically painful in a way that paying with a card is not. When the transaction is frictionless, a tap, a click, a stored card, the brain's accounting system does not register the loss with the same weight as a physical exchange. The result is that digital, frictionless payment systems are not neutral tools. They are architecturally designed to reduce the cognitive resistance to spending. And they work. The slow bleed accelerates in a world of one-click purchases and automatic renewals precisely because the pain of paying has been systematically engineered away. Knowing this does not mean going back to cash for everything. It means introducing deliberate friction into the spending process. Pausing before confirming, removing stored card information from shopping platforms, reviewing charges weekly rather than monthly. Small friction, large impact. The fourth layer is what I call bleeding points mapping. Identify the 3 to 5 specific contexts in your life where unconscious spending consistently occurs. For most people, there are patterns. It's the morning commute. It's the online store browsed out of boredom. It's the social situation where spending feels like participation. It's the emotional state, stress, boredom, mild anxiety, that triggers a purchase as a form of relief. These are your bleeding points. And once you name them, once you see them clearly as the specific locations where the slow bleed happens, you can design your environment to interrupt them, not through willpower, which is finite and unreliable, but through structural changes that make the default behavior harder and the intentional behavior easier. The fifth layer is the most psychologically demanding, and it is the one that separates people who manage to stop the bleed temporarily from those who stop it permanently. It requires confronting the emotional function of unconscious spending in your life. For most people, small, impulsive purchases are not random. They are performing a psychological service. They are providing stimulation in a moment of boredom. They are providing comfort in a moment of stress. They are providing a sense of control in a moment of uncertainty. They are providing social belonging in a context where spending signals participation. None of these are trivial needs. They are real, but they are being met with a solution, unconscious spending, that carries a cost. You are not consciously agreeing to pay. Finding alternative ways to meet these needs is not a financial exercise. It is a psychological one, and it is where the deepest work of stopping the slow bleed actually lives. I know the resistance that's building in you right now. You're thinking these amounts are too small to matter. You're thinking, I work hard. I deserve to enjoy my money. You're thinking life is short, and I'm not going to count every coffee. And you're right about one thing. Life is short, but the slow bleed doesn't just cost you money. It costs you the life you would have been able to live if the money had been building instead of bleeding. It costs you the option to leave the job that is consuming you. It costs you the ability to handle an emergency without panic. It costs you the feeling, rare, powerful, and entirely achievable, of being someone whose financial life is moving in a direction rather than simply surviving another month. The cost of the slow bleed is not the sum of the small purchases. It is the shape of the life you never get to live because the capital that would have funded it was lost before you ever saw it. Here's the version of reality I want you to hold alongside your own. Two people, same income, same city, same starting point. One lives inside the slow bleed, the other doesn't. Not because the second person earns more, not because they had better luck, Because at some point, the second person looked at their financial life with the same clarity and honesty that I am asking you to apply right now, and decided that the defaults were not acceptable, that the invisible was worth making visible, that the bleed was worth stopping. 30 years later, the financial distance between these two people is not the result of talent, opportunity, or fate. It is the compounded result of a single decision made once, with full awareness of what was at stake. The slow bleed ends when you decide to see it, not when the economy improves, not when you earn more, not when the circumstances of your life conveniently align to make change feel easy. It ends when you look at the quiet, persistent drain on your financial life and choose, consciously, deliberately, without waiting for a more convenient moment, to stop it. You have been bleeding. You have been bleeding for longer than you want to admit. And the question is not whether you can afford to stop. The question is whether you can afford to continue. If this landed in a way that feels like it changed, something, even slightly, even uncomfortably, drop the word aware in the comments, not for the algorithm, because waking up to the slow bleed is the beginning of something, and I want to know who here is starting. Subscribe to this channel if you want to keep building the financial awareness that most people spend their entire lives without developing. This is not a place for hacks. It is a place for the kind of clarity that actually changes the trajectory of a financial life. One concept at a time, one decision at a time, one less bleed at a time. The drain was always visible. You just had to decide to look.